Hello and welcome everybody. My name is Liendgens and I'll be your host for the next 45 minutes or so. Can we do a quick audio check to make sure that everybody can hear me okay? If you can just type into the chat real quick, yes, I can hear you, that'd be fantastic. Well, so far I have not received an answer. If you can hear me, please type yes into the chat. Yes, okay, wonderful. Well, once again, welcome. My name is Liendgens, and I would like to really thank Converge for giving me the opportunity to lead today's session. I know that they are just as much in love with content strategy as I am, and we at Hannon Hill are very, very pleased to have them as a partner. So let's get started. By the way, we will record this session, and we'll also have plenty of time afterwards for Q&A. So feel free to keep typing your questions in the chat, and I will make sure that we have plenty of time for that. And of course, I will also make my information available if you want to follow up with me afterwards. Well, just to quickly introduce myself, again, my name is Liendgens. I'm the CEO here at Hannon Hill. I've put up my Twitter handle here, which is @Liendgens, as well as Hannon Hill's Twitter handle, which is @Hannon_Hill. So please feel free to interact with me on Twitter or through email. My email is super easy. It's just cat@hannonhill.com. And I'm an email junkie, and I love talking about content strategy, so please feel free to reach out to me at any point in time if you have any questions. So as I mentioned, we make Cascade Server CMS, and I know that there are some of our customers on the line here, so I know that you're already familiar with us. I know that there's a lot of you in higher education that have heard of Cascade Server, so I don't want to spend too much time on this, but Cascade powers over 24,000 higher education websites, and we also support over 90,000 users. Again, I'll keep it quick, just a quick brag here. Cascade recently won the CMS Critics People's Choice Award for Best Enterprise CMS, as well as we've been recognized as top-rated CMS by Trust Radius and top product by University Business. But today, we're not really here to talk about Cascade at all. What we will talk about is how website management really has changed over the past 10 years. And not just from a technology standpoint, but really also from a process standpoint. And content management as a whole has evolved tremendously over the years. So we will take a look at some of the themes that have emerged and that will be emerging. So when we talk about content marketing, it's not a term that a lot of higher education institutions were really actively using a few years ago. But it's become a real focal point over the years for them. So we'll talk about some of the cornerstones of content marketing as well as some of the challenges for today's content marketers. And we'll take a look at some continuing trends as well as emerging trends in the world of content marketing and content management. And finally, we'll talk about what the importance of content marketing really means with regard to your content management tools. As, again, we will not talk about a specific CMS at all, but rather talk about what are some of the things that you want to look for when assessing your current CMS and maybe looking at some other options for a new CMS. So let's get things started and take a look back here, then and now. So one of the easiest ways that I like to do to illustrate just how much the web has changed and the way that organizations have approached their online presence is to compare what websites looked like 10 years ago compared to now. And one of the tools that I really like to use is the Wayback Machine. And so I used that Wayback Machine and looked at some of our customers' homepages from 10 years ago, and then compared that to the way their homepages look. So mind you, there'll be some broken images here that couldn't be retrieved by the Wayback Machine, but I think overall you see some of the very obvious themes that will emerge. So the first example here is Clemson University. This is a screenshot of their site back in 2006. What we'll see immediately is that they were pretty concerned that people wouldn't be able to find what they were looking for. So as a remedy here, you'll see a lot of links, right? So you have a lot of links like the A through Z index. You have some categorizations of links, group them by specific personas for students, faculty, alumni. So there's a lot of ways to find things. You can see, though, that those links don't really provide a whole lot of context. Also, 10 years ago, scrolling was really kind of frowned upon. So as you can see here, we kind of kept things above the fold. And some of the things that we're not seeing here 10 years ago, we don't really see links to social media channels. We didn't really see any specific calls to action. And we didn't really see any storytelling on the front page. What we do see here up on the top is a collage, if you want to take a look there. So we're hinting at the fact that there's some stories there, but we're not really giving access to these stories just yet. Well, this is what Clemson's site looks like today. So what we'll immediately see is that the page is a lot longer, to the point even where the nav scrolls with you, as you can see here in the screenshot. And scrolling is allowed. We don't have to stay above the fold anymore. Scrolling is allowed because there's a lot more content on the page compared to just links that we saw previously. And you'll see that there's also multiple layers of content. So there's a lot of scrolling even on the actual homepage itself. So there's a lot of layers in which you can access content. The storytelling aspect is definitely very, very prominent. As you can see here where I highlighted in the headlines. And it actually scrolls further. There's a lot of different stories that you can click on. Another thing that we immediately see is that there's multiple calls to action. So instead of just throwing a bunch of search options out there, we are prompting our visitors to take specific actions that we want them to take. So for example, we have applying, donating, or signing up for a campus tour. So we no longer relinquish control over what our visitors might want to do. We actually prompt them to take the actions that we want them to take. At the bottom here, I don't know if you can see this, but I circled this. We're also using multiple social media channels to which we push content and from which we consume content on the website. And one of the other things that we can see here in comparison to 10 years ago is that you can see a lot more content syndication. So it's really sharing content across multiple sites, such as a calendar of events and newsroom. That's something that we see across the board now. And finally, we see that there's a lot of data that's being used now as evidence of marketing statements. So let's take a look at another example here. This is example number 2 out of 3. This is the University of Richmond. That's their homepage from 10 years ago. And don't mind the image here that couldn't be pulled out. I warned you about that. But once again, we're trying to stay above the fold. We're starting to see some content syndication here, but not a whole lot just yet. Overall, we see mostly links without a ton of context. Again, 10 years ago, not much social media integration at all, and not a lot of calls to action. So you'll see just how different their homepage looks like 10 years later. Look at this. So scrolling is not just allowed, but absolutely necessary, because just like in the previous example of Clemson, we're seeing that there's a lot more content there. There's also multiple layers of content on the home page. So for example, if I click on one of those items here on the left that I circled, the content on the right automatically changes. So there's different ways to actually uncover content on the home page itself, just because there's so much content there. We're also seeing some social media integration here, as you can see. And the next example here is that, once again, this is an example of using data, using hard data as a marketing tool. We have clear calls to action here, crystal clear what we want them to do. We want them to visit the campus. And once again, there's a huge emphasis on storytelling and showcasing actual humans, right? It's all about connecting with the audience on an emotional level. And the final example here is William Woods University. They actually converted to Cascade Server last year from their previous CMS. So let's take a look at 10 years ago. Again, there's a missing image. Don't mind that. That wasn't missing back then. But overall, the site is similar to what we've seen with the previous examples here. There's not a lot of content on the home page. There's no social media. There's a heavy reliance on search, right? So we hope that our audience types in search terms to find what they're looking for. And now you'll be absolutely amazed when I switch over to the new site. What a difference. This is a beautiful site, and it's very strategic, as we'll see. A lot of strategic thinking went into this one. So the calls to action are crystal clear. There's no doubt what we want the audience to do. Once again, there's also a clear strategy with regard to the cross-site sharing of content. As you can see here, we pull in content from a calendar of events. We pull in content from a newsroom. Once again, we make use of bold statements that can be backed up by data. And I talked about the multi-layered content, right? Once again, we have this multi-layered content and a big, big emphasis on storytelling and really connecting with your target audience. So we've gone through those 3 examples here. So now let's talk about some of the themes that we've been seeing here. Clearly, sites are now optimized for different devices, including mobile. So responsive design is huge. But one of the things that I really want to point out is that just because you've implemented a responsive design, that doesn't mean that you're really delivering the best possible user experience. Because it's not just about responsive design, it's also about responsive content. And we'll talk a little bit about responsive content in a few minutes here. The other thing that I would like to point out here is that responsive is not just a designer's responsibility. It's also the responsibility of whoever implements the CMS, and you'll be surprised, but it's also the responsibility of your content contributors. How do you write your content in a way that it can be optimally consumed by mobile devices? And this, of course, takes some education, and I'd be happy to have a discussion with any of you to find out how you educate your content contributors to really write content for mobile devices. Another trend here that we're seeing is that content-wise, there's a lot more effort on showing data to make a marketing statement. And this is just one indication that organizations really are thinking much more strategically about their target audiences and about their content. Another theme here is an increasing integration with other systems. And other systems can be a variety of things. They can be calendars, HR systems and portals. They can be, of course, catalog systems, social media, as we've seen. Marketing automation tools are definitely gaining some traction here. So just to name a few examples here of how your CMS integrates with other systems. And really the overall goal here is to move towards a model where every single piece of data and content is only managed in one place. And this, of course, leads us to the COPE model, right? And I'm sure a lot of you have heard about this. COPE means create once, publish everywhere. And this is something that we'll talk more in depth about in just a few minutes here. And I've mentioned this before when we talked about the examples. Cross-site sharing of content across multiple pages and across multiple sites really is another theme that shows just how important this COPE concept has become. So here you can see, I pulled an example from the University of California, Santa Cruz. The main homepage and every individual school's homepage has this middle bar containing content that can be shared across different sites. And users that set up those pages here can simply navigate to shareable blocks, and they can decide what they want to include in that middle bar. So in this example here, in the left, you see the main homepage for UC Santa Cruz, and then on the right, you see the homepage for the Division of Physical and Biological Sciences. So as you can see, the middle bar here is completely customizable. So it's really up to the individual site administrators to pick whichever reusable content they want to display. So cross-site sharing of content is very, very important, so you want to make sure that you always have a CMS in place that makes that extremely easy. And finally, one of the most obvious changes that we're seeing here when we look at the home pages and overall websites 10 years ago compared to now is that there's a lot more emphasis on storytelling, on really connecting with your target audience and connecting with different segments of your target audience on a very, very personal level. And real themes that we just looked at lead us to a big one, and that is that we are now being a lot more strategic about our content than we were 10 years ago. And to be honest, 10 years ago, a lot of times the dominant web strategy was just to put content out there, just put it out there and just have a big collection. But we really weren't that strategic about our content. But now, in order to stay competitive and to have a sustainable and even scalable model of content creation, you just have to be more strategic. And what I put up here on this slide here is something that I would really like you to take a look at. This is from Content Marketing Institute's 2015 report. Content Marketing Institute releases this report every single year, and they've been incredibly accurate as far as predicting trends. So I highly recommend checking it out. So one of the findings here of this report is that 69% of all business-to-consumer marketers are creating more content than they did 12 months ago. What that means is that we're making a significant investment into our content. We're putting a lot of resources into our content. And therefore, we need to make sure that we get the best possible URI. We have no choice but to be more strategic. So with the rise of content marketing and the undeniable need for organizations to develop and execute and really to maintain a content strategy, what I'd like to do next is just to take a look at some of the things that are crucial when it comes to putting an effective strategy in place. I think everybody here can agree now that you need a strategy, right? So now we just have to figure out what are some of the components that we need to have in order to put this strategy in place. The first thing really is to start with your goals, right? Because if you don't know what your goals are, then how are you going to develop a strategy to achieve those goals? What do I mean by goals? Well, I actually refer to goals to your organization's goals for your online presence. Why are you doing this? Why are you putting resources towards your digital presence? Well, if you ask higher education organizations, your organizational goal is to change the world and change lives. And that is absolutely correct, and that is admirable. You absolutely want to do that. That's the ultimate goal. But in order to keep changing the world and keep changing lives, you need to drive student applications. There is no denying that. Without driving student applications, there is no changing lives. You also want to increase donations, right? To keep the lights on, to keep doing what you need to be doing. That's really the bottom line. And there are other contributing goals that you might have here. So, for example, you want to maximize brand awareness and recognition. You want to recruit top-notch faculty and staff. You want to interact with your community. And you want to provide excellent service to all segments of your audience. So there's a lot of contributing goals. But really, the bottom line, I don't know what's going on with my slides here. The bottom line is that it is about the bottom line. And one of the things that I would like to point out, because when I ask higher education organizations, when I talk to them about content strategy, what's your goal? Sometimes the answer is, I want to have X number of visitors, so I want to have X number of page views. And one thing to keep in mind here that's not a goal, right? 1 million visitors really means nothing if it doesn't result in the number of applications and the number of donations that you need to generate, right? So really the bottom line is that it is, in fact, about the bottom line. You need those applications in order to keep changing the world. And that's been a really big paradigm shift. now that marketing and communication professionals have realized this, it's a lot easier to talk about the marketing and sales funnel. I remember a few years ago, when I was talking to marketing and communications folks, they would cringe when I even mentioned that funnel, right? We don't want to be salesy. We have all these other goals. But I'm really glad to see that that's no longer the case. We're really seeing a significant shift. And marketing is now responsible for the majority of this funnel. Look at how much it's changed, how much the responsibilities have changed. Why do you think that is? Well, if you look at this funnel here, you'll see that your prospective students are about 2/3 through their decision-making process before they ever interact with one of your admission reps. This is significant. I'm going to pause for a second just to let that sink in. Your prospective students are about 2/3 through their decision-making process before they ever interact with one of your admission reps. So really the question that you want to ask yourself is what you want to do. Do you want to relinquish control over the majority of your prospective students or your prospective donors' decision-making process? Do you want to rely on them using just the right search terms to find what you want them to find at the time that you want them to find it? Or do you want to make sure that you deliver targeted content to different segments of your audience at different points in time during their journey? That's really the key here. You want different segments of your audience to see different things at different points in time while they're interacting with you and your digital presence. But you can really only do that if you know who they are, if you know your personas, if you know both their current journeys on your site and the journeys that you want them to have in order to make the decisions that you want them to make. So essentially, your goal is to become a digital travel agent. And mind you, I talk about target audience. It's crucial to address both the right and the wrong audience. There are certain personas that you don't want to apply because they're maybe bad fits for your college. And you really don't want to waste your time nurturing the bad fits, nurturing them too far down the funnel. So you want to attract the right audience, but you also want to repel the wrong audience as quickly as possible. And that's just as much part of the visitor journey mapping as nurturing the right audience. So, I promised you we will not talk about a specific CMS, but now that we know the importance of content strategy, we know some of the trends that we want to address here. Let's talk about some of the things that you might want to look for in a CMS. One of the things that you might want to look for in a CMS is the ability to track your anonymous visitors as well as your identified leads. And a lead is somebody who has identified themselves on your website, and to follow their journeys. So some of the things you might want to look for is, or to look at, is where your leads came from before they entered your site. Where do they hang out? I want to know as much about them as possible so I can deliver the best possible content to them. So in that case, I also want to know what search terms they used. Which forms did they fill out? What pages did they look at? So instead of reporting on how many visitors a certain page has, which I'm not saying that that's a bad data point to have. It's a nice data point to have. But perhaps the focus should be on whether your target personas actually are taking the journey that you want them to take. And then once you find that out by looking at that kind of data, then you can make the decisions and you can make some adjustment to your content and to your information architecture as needed so you can optimize those journeys. And what you can do with this data by tracking your visitors and your leads, what you can do with this data is not just optimize your site in general for specific personas, but you can even deliver targeted content to specific people. How powerful is that? So let's take a look at an example here. I have a form on my example website here. And in this case, I have a prospective student named Gus. And Gus fills out a form. And in this form, he indicates that he is a prospective student, and he's a prospective student from Georgia here. What you can do is actually use that information to show content specifically for prospective students, and also content geared towards Georgia in particular. So as a result, Gus is going to have a significantly better experience on your website than just navigating through some generic content. So you'll want to make sure that you have the tools in place to accomplish this targeted content delivery. I can't stress this enough, really. Part of optimizing visitor journeys includes delivering customized content to different segments of your audience at different points in time during the decision-making process. Well, I was raving about this Content Marketing Institute report, so let's take a look at a couple more key findings here. We've seen that marketers are creating more content than before. I talked about this a few minutes ago. But now take a look at this. Only 37% think that they're effective in their efforts. Only 37%. So we know we have no choice but to put more and more resources towards creating more content. But how depressing is this statistic here, that only 37% think that they're effective in their efforts? And even more concerning here, only 23% think that they're successfully tracking their ROI. 23%. How can you improve if you can't measure what works and what doesn't? And I think that's where a lot of CMS providers fall short. You know, they may have some Google Analytics connector, which we do as well. A lot of them have that, and a lot of them have, you know, pulling up the, you know, some widgets that show page views. But like I said before, that's not really goal tracking. That doesn't give you any indication of the success of your content strategy. And so CMSs in the past really used to only focus on content creation and publishing, right? So you only saw a small portion of this content lifecycle. I don't think that's good enough anymore. I think you really need, and higher education in general, needs a suite of tools that supports the entire content lifecycle. And that helps you become more effective with every iteration of your strategy, because now higher education understands this, understands the importance of having a strategy and not just pushing content out. And so on the slide here, you really see what the cycle looks like. You basically track and measure everything you can so you have comprehensive data that gives you action items. And you know, I talked a little bit about Google Analytics before, and I'm not knocking Google Analytics at all. I think everybody should be using it. It's a fantastic tool. But you can only, you know, you can look at Google Analytics reports all day long and never really have any clear action items, right? So don't look at analytics for analytics' sake. Focus on the data that really has the power to change the way that you do your job. Your data has to be actionable. Then you plan the next iteration of your strategy, and hopefully your CMS has the features in place to help you do that, right? So you create and update your content based on your strategy. Then, if you follow the cycle here, you promote your content through various channels here. And that can be through cross-site sharing of content, it can be through email, it could be through RSS feeds. And you look at more actionable data that tells you what works and what doesn't. And that's really the only way that's going to help you to become more effective and see better outcomes as a result of using a CMS that supports this model of supporting the entire content lifecycle. So here's another thing that you might want to consider when assessing your current CMS is behavior tracking. Once again, Google Analytics is great. It gives you some wonderful high-level view of the performance of your website. But in order to have a much deeper understanding of what works and what doesn't in terms of your website, you also need to be able to track the behavior of both anonymous visitors and, to me, what's even more important, of leads that have already identified themselves on your site. So why do I think this is more important to track leads over visitors? Because that's your target audience right there, right? So you can have some visitors and you can track what they're doing, but you don't really know if that's really your target audience. With leads, you know for sure. They've taken the time to identify themselves. You know that that's your target audience. So you want to make sure that you see what their journeys are on your site so that you can optimize that for them. And we briefly touched on COPE before. Create once, publish everywhere. So you have many different systems sharing content and sharing data in multiple directions, right? That concept is not new. I'm sure a lot of you are doing this already. And COPE is not a new concept. It was originally introduced by NPR many, many years ago. And for those of you who are not super familiar with that concept, the main idea really is to have a single piece of content pushed to a multitude of platforms in a multitude of formats. So why is that so important? Why is COPE becoming such a big term? Well, because it's the only, and I can't repeat this enough, it's the only sustainable way to manage content. There are so many platforms now to which content needs to be delivered, some of which we don't even know about yet. There's so many future platforms that come out on a daily basis. And you can't possibly continue to develop content specifically for every single channel. And as you can see here, it's not just about web content anymore. There's a lot of different ways into which content needs to be promoted and which content needs to be consumed. So, as I mentioned, COPE is the only sustainable way to manage content just because of the sheer multitude of platforms to which content needs to be pushed. But I'm not asking you to take this from me at all. If you don't believe me, I can live with that. Some of you may be familiar with Karen McGrane, and if you're not, I highly, highly recommend checking out her website. It's actually KarenMcGrane.com. She's a real thought leader when it comes to content strategy. And so there's a lot of great content on her site. And I want to read you, I'm not a big fan of reading big chunks of text here, but this is really crucial, and this really shows you why COPE is important and why it's important for us to have a paradigm shift in terms of approaching the way that we manage content. And here's what Karen McGrane said back in October of 2014. Friends, a zombie apocalypse is upon us. An onslaught of new mobile devices, platforms, and screen sizes, hordes of them descending every day. We're outmatched. There aren't enough designers and developers to battle every platform. There aren't enough editors and writers to populate every screen size. Defeating the zombies will require flexibility and stamina in our content. We'll have to separate our content from its form so it can adapt appropriately to different contexts and constraints. We'll have to change our production workflow so we're not just shoveling content from one output to another. And we'll have to enhance our content management tools and interfaces so they're ready for the future. And just like Karen pointed out, we really need to change content. What I read to you is that there's no way that your content contributors will be able to customize the design for every platform or content specifically for every single channel. So in order to make sure that your content is ready to be pushed to multiple platforms in multiple ways, we really need a major paradigm shift. And one of the things that Karen McGrane uses, and I really like this, is a description of the dumb blobs versus smart chunks. And again, I'm staying CMS agnostic, so this is not a real CMS, which is why it looks so funny here. But here's an illustration of the classic dumb blob. You let all of your contributors put all of their content into one big monolithic WYSIWYG editor. And CMS vendors love to sell their systems showing how easy it is for end users, right? I know you've seen this. I know you've seen this in demos, right? You just put everything into this ginormous WYSIWYG and style it to your heart's content. Well, this may sound good, but it's absolutely not conducive to code at all. So just to illustrate this in this example here. In this example, how would you take a small chunk of this content and push it to another page or another platform? Right? It's impossible because the CMS treats all of this as one big piece. So that's really an archaic model, and it's not sustainable, and it really doesn't set you up for success. Now let's take a look at a much better way to organize your content and to make it conducive to cope. And of course, again, this is not an actual CMS you see, so we wanted to keep it neutral in this presentation. But this is a mock-up that shows the concept here. What you need to do is to separate your content from the design. And instead of having this big, dumb, WYSIWYG blob, you actually break your content into smaller pieces that can then be strategically reused and shared across multiple pages or across multiple sites, and ultimately across any platform to which you want to push it. And I can hear links now. Am I proclaiming the death of the WYSIWYG editor? And I know Karen McGrane would say, please do, make it happen. Honestly, I don't think it'll happen tomorrow. But what we are looking at is a slow but kind of inevitable death. Just because it's not a sustainable model for managing content. So I certainly recommend, even if you use WYSIWYGs now, at least don't put all of your content on the page into one giant WYSIWYG editor. Instead, start educating your content contributors on making more reusable smart chunks. Educate them on COPE, and start implementing this approach in your CMS, no matter which CMS you're using. So the next question here automatically arises. I've heard this question many times before. Is, well, if you say that we need to separate the content from the design, should users have no control at all over the look of a page? Well, there's really no point in your contributors worrying about styling because, as I mentioned before, it's not a scalable model when you're pushing content to an ever-increasing number of channels and platforms, right? Not only is it not scalable, but it's just a bad idea to rely on styling to convey meaning. I mean, just to give an example here, if you have an e-reader, or if you have a reader in your car that's reading content to you, that's not going to be able to describe italics or bold letters, right? Style should not convey meaning. Words should convey meaning. But that being said, what I wanted to point out is that that doesn't mean that your user should have no control over the look of a page. I'm not saying that that's the case at all. Because what they need to be able to do is to actually make changes to a page layout on the fly and to add components and blocks to pages. And all of this should be possible without involving technical resources at all. So one of the examples that I pulled here that you can see is an example of SIU. And this is their approach. They didn't implement a dozen templates or more. No. They implemented one template that gives the end users the power to change the layout on the fly and pick the components that should go on this page. Very powerful. So instead of having your content contributors worry about a font color or italics or things of that nature that really don't matter, you need to be able to empower your content contributors to think strategically about how to make your content reusable and how to put your pages together in a way that makes sense, right? And so having this template flexibility is a key requirement. And again, this is another example here. This is from Tarleton University. So instead of having this one monolithic WYSIWYG that is not conducive to code, what your content contributors should be able to control is what types of chunks of content should be on a page and where those chunks should go. So for example, your user should be able to switch the layout of a page and add components as they see fit, right? If they want to add a carousel, they should be able to do that on the fly. If they wanted to add an accordion, they should be able to do that. So whether, or if they want to change the number of columns on the page, they should be able to do that with just a simple click. So whether you're assessing your current CMS or maybe evaluating some alternatives, it's important to really keep all those trends in mind, because all of those trends will be the norm. And you don't want to fall too far behind, because that will really affect the effectiveness of your content strategy that you're heavily invested in. So let's recap some of the key things that we talked about. I don't want to keep you too long, and I want to make sure that there's enough time for Q&A. So what we're seeing in terms of content strategy and what that means for your CMS are the following trends here. Full content lifecycle support. It's no longer about just managing your content, right? Content management systems have evolved so much more. It's really about empowering your users to be more strategic about their content and about effectively promoting it through a variety of channels and to obtain actionable data that helps refine your content strategy. Talked about behavior tracking. And again, Google Analytics is great and gives you a wonderful high-level view. But what you want to do is develop a much deeper understanding of what works and what doesn't work for your website. So you'll need to be able to track the behavior of anonymous visitors and, even more importantly, of leads that have already identified themselves on your site. That's your target audience. You want to see their journeys, and you want to see how you can optimize them. And part of optimizing visitor journeys includes delivering customized content to those different segments of your audience at different points in time during their decision-making process. And we spend a good amount of time talking about taupe, and that's another hugely important development here with regard to content management. Create once, publish everywhere. As I mentioned before, and I really can't stress it enough, this is the only sustainable and scalable way that you'll be able to manage content and push it to new platforms. And there will be more and more platforms to which you will have to deliver content. And this will change the way that we approach content management. There's no question about that. So we have to get away from the idea of just dumping content into this one big WYSIWYG editor, and we have to move towards a more strategic way of managing content through reusable blocks that can be shared across pages, that can be shared across sites, and that can be shared across basically any platform, current or future. And secondly, we need to stop using style to convey meaning, because your content will not be just published to web pages anymore. And even if it was, style means nothing to a reader device. But as we pointed out, that doesn't mean that your users have no control over the look of a page. What your users need to be able to do is to make changes to a page layout, basically on the fly, and to add components and blocks to pages. And all of this should definitely be possible without involving any technical resources. So as you are looking at your current CMS, or maybe looking to make some changes down the road, it's really important to keep those trends in mind, because those will be the standard. So you don't want to fall too far behind. Always want to keep those trends at top of mind. Well, look at that. Look at the time, 2:44. So almost on the dot to open it up for Q&A. Again, my information is up here. You can email me at any time. I love talking content strategy, so feel free to reach out to me at any time at kat@hannonhill.com. I'll open it up. Sometimes I know in the heat of the moment it's hard to come up with questions, but I'll definitely stick around in case there are any. But once again, feel free to reach out to me via email. Once again, thank you, Converge, for letting me host the session. And thank you, everybody who participated. I'm just very thrilled to be talking to you. So I'll open it up for questions in case there are any.
Okay, Kat, I have a question for you. Can you hear me? This is Monica from Converge.
Yes, Monica, please.
Okay. So the first question, in 15 years of building CMS websites, I've literally never seen one of those dumb blobs. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, kudos to the person who asked that question, because dumb blobs are, in fact, everywhere. So I've seen this a lot of times when, you know, the majority of your content on the web page is managed through just one big WYSIWYG editor. And you know, sometimes if you have a little bit more sophistication, you have some components like the navigation that's automatically generated in the footer. But really, what I've seen over the years is that in order to appease the non-technical users, there can be a tendency to just put everything in this one big WYSIWYG and have your end user style it to your heart's content. And unfortunately, that is the case, and that's something that Karen McGrane has been lamenting for many years as well. But if you have not seen that, then I commend you. You're doing a lot of things right.
Another great question. What are the types of teams do you work with or see implementing strategies to support the content strategy? Marketing, web, communications, aligned horizontal teams made up across the board?
Mm-hmm. That's a really interesting question, and that's something that's been evolving over the years, I think. I think there's a lot more responsibility on marketing communications than there ever has been. I think the roles are changing a little bit. I've heard a lot of marketing communication teams actually have a specific role that's a content strategist. Sometimes they're called content managers, but really the role is a content strategist. And they work in collaboration with your end users to train them on the importance of web content, on how to best measure success. And they also work with the remaining web team to really identify and strategize what can be done to make content more effective. But yeah, that's really different depending on the different organizations. But yeah, whereas previously, 10 years ago, a lot of times it was, IT that managed the website, and then you had maybe one webmaster, but there really wasn't as much strategy as there is now. So more and more, we're seeing a lot more collaboration, and that's one of the things that came out of this Content Marketing Institute's report too that I didn't talk about in this particular presentation is that the teams that consider themselves the most effective are the ones that had meetings with the entire web team and with their content contributors on an ongoing basis. So the effort is a lot more collaborative than it ever has been. But yeah, just to get back to your questions, yeah, marketing communications typically is the department that now owns content strategy, and I can see more and more specializations coming out of that, including a content strategist.
Great. Does Hannon Hill have plans to allow targeted content to authenticated users tied to a student info system, for example?
To quickly answer your question, yes, we certainly understand the importance of delivering targeted content. That's something that we already have been addressing. So there's many different ways in which you can do that. But yeah, that is certainly something that we're addressing.
Great. So we had one more question, and that is if the webinar will be available via recording. I will be sending the recording out tomorrow along with Kat's slides. So you will get all of this information tomorrow morning. If you have any questions for us, just let us know, reach out. Kat's information is on the screen now. You can email me at events@convergeconsulting.org. But I want to thank Kat again for hosting this great webinar. It was really wonderful. You shared a lot of great information. And we just want to thank you again for taking the time from your day.
All right, thanks again.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.